teachers are making, probably tens of thousands of decisions every day. And so, to the outside eye, it looks very easy. When you see a good teacher, they make it look so easy.
Welcome to Oxygen for Educators. I'm one of your hosts, Michelle Kinder, and you'll meet Chris Kent Phelps in just a bit. It's our hope to bring you thought-provoking, unscripted conversations full of actionable ideas to fuel your important work in the world. Thanks for tuning in. This space is for you. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Michelle. Nice to see you.
It's nice to see you too.
Do you have your holiday spirit going yet?
Yes, it's building.
There you go.
Yes, we are feeling the energy. Our youngest daughter is like Christmas obsessed. And so she's trained us that it's like a 6-week process and it's like full pedal to the metal Christmas spirit before Thanksgiving. Yeah. How about you?
Yes, I'm getting there. My son has been texting me that his pregame music has now become Michael Bublé's Christmas album. So, kind of got to get with it. Keep up with the times over here.
That's so cute. Well, share with everybody a little bit about Nicholas. He is such a... I was trying to think of like how I would describe him. The integrity of his intellectual curiosity and like unvarnished hope in humanity made me feel bad about myself.
Well, that's the reason I just kind of fell in love with him in his first few words. So, agreed.
Awesome. Tell people a little bit.
Okay, so Nicholas Ditto, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but Ditto, Nicholas Ditto. He currently is the founder and CEO of Fort Worth STEAM Academy, which is a public charter middle school, which I found fascinating, scheduled to open in August of 2026. And the school will be a tuition-free option open to all kids, which I loved. Prior to that, for over 10 years, he was a teacher, instructional coach, and most recently, the founding principal of Idea Rise College Prep, which is also a middle school and high school located in Fort Worth, Texas. Under his leadership, the school received consecutive A ratings from TEA and was recognized as the best middle school from U.S. News and World Report. So middle school is obviously Nicholas's jam, which I love, and we'll talk more about that after the interview. But I did want to point out that he was recommended to us from Brent Beasley, who's been a guest on the podcast. And I know you touched on this in the podcast interview, but what Brent had to say was that Nicholas is the most effective school leader I know in Fort Worth. And that comment from Brent Beasley carries a lot of gravitas. So I wanted to mention that in the opening. And then what I loved about him is he just clearly was a social justice warrior from the jump and took a really interesting path to do work in the criminal justice space. So I found his story fascinating. So let's let our listeners hear it.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Hello, Nicholas.
Hello, Michelle. How are you doing today?
I feel excited to meet you because our mutual friend, Brent Beasley, who was a former guest on the podcast, described you as one of the most effective educators he's ever seen. And he's seen a lot of educators.
I was just going to say that coming especially from Brent really means a lot, just with the amount of time that he's spent in the space and the amount of places and folks that he knows. So.
He's very discerning. Like, I don't think he would just give away that for free. So you've clearly earned it.
I was just going to say, I was like, no, that was not for free. It was definitely earned, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears.
Well, tell everyone a little bit about your story. And I'm especially interested in how you were kind of veering toward law and then took a turn into education and just how that has shaped you over the years.
Yeah. So really growing up from high school, the plan was to become a public defender. I really was passionate about fairness and wanting to make sure that in a system where resources so often determine outcomes, that hopefully I could help be a little bit different than that. And as I was getting ready to graduate from college, I ended up in this education info session. I don't even recall how I ended up there, but
Wait,
it was
where were you? Where did you grow up and where were you in school?
yeah. So I grew up in Chicago, and that's where I lived until I was 18. And then I went to the University of Minnesota up in Minneapolis.
Okay, and
So from
that's where
cold
you
to
were.
colder.
From cold to
Yes.
colder.
Yeah, so that's where I was. Ended up in this education info session, and it was really a light bulb and a life changing moment. As I walked out, I had such clarity about so many of the root causes that usually ended up with folks in the justice system were really tied back to an unequal access to high quality education. And it was really in that moment I realized that I could make the greatest impact inside the classroom instead of the courtroom. So it was a massive pivot. I moved halfway across the country to Phoenix, Arizona to become a middle school science teacher. I think when I was there the first year, I was like, oh, maybe I'll go to law school. And then I didn't take the LSAT. And then the second year came and I started coaching teachers during the summer. And just at that point was really so bought in into education. And from there, I moved back to Chicago, taught high school science. And so it was great to be part of a really high performing set of schools and have a chance to see just the power of that. And then Idea Public Schools brought me to Texas, where I was a principal in training with them for a couple of years. And they brought me up to Fort Worth, where I opened Idea Rise College Prep. And that's really where I started in, the principalship, and then now have moved on in founding Fort Worth SEAM Academy. And so excited for the work that we've done and will continue to do once the doors are open.
Well, I have so many questions about that, but I want to go back to just what an extraordinary thing that was, that you walked into a seminar and walked out and felt like that level of clarity and took such a significant pivot in your plan from that. Like, that just gives me chills.
Yeah, I think I found the most powerful storytelling really weaves together a narrative along with data at a larger scale. And that's really what the seminar did. Again, you were able to hear from some individuals that were personally impacted positively by education, but also being able to see the statistics. Again, the big link between reading level and folks that are incarcerated, the links between education level and socioeconomic status. And then as well, tying back to zip codes. And so I think that was the most powerful thing for me, was realizing that the zip code you were born into has such a huge predictor on your long-term outcomes, because zip codes are so linked to the quality of school that folks are in. And I think that's another reason why now continuing in education, I am such an advocate around school choice, as I think one way that can help, break that cycle, along with just elevating the quality of schools overall, I think is a really important endeavor.
Yeah, because in many ways, you didn't really do a huge shift. It's almost like you were like, the way I'm going to attend to this thing that's always been on my heart is further upstream.
Yes, that is exactly it. And so for me, it didn't feel like such a shift. It felt like it was the same mission, the same passion.
Yeah.
The work was a little bit different, but to your point of being upstream and thinking in a more proactive approach versus a reactive approach. And so that felt even better, hoping that, a lot of the kids that I taught never ended up in the justice system, instead of being able to help folks try to get on the right path later.
Mm-hmm. And this I think I know what data you're talking about, and really when we look at the data from even a dispassionate point of view, it's pretty clear that access and opportunity is a massive piece of the puzzle. This could be an unfair question, so feel free to say pass or whatever, but Why do you think, even though the data speaks clearly into that, it's such a divisive issue? If you think it is.
Could you tell me a little, could you speak a little bit more? What is the divisive issue, or what are you specifically thinking about?
Yes, you're catching me process in real time. Even our dogs are weighing in. I don't know if you can hear them. You're catching me process in real time, because I'm just thinking about, like, there have been times in recent history where there was it felt collective to want to attend to access an opportunity and even the playing field. And then somewhere along the way in the last few years, it's felt like some wire got tripped that made it feel to people that if everyone is served well, the people who have been served well all along will somehow not be served well. And so it feels like it went from we can really use this data and this insight to guide us into how to lift all boats, to a place where it felt like that narrative in some circles feels threatening. Tell me if I'm completely off, or if it's just my experience.
No, I would just say from my perspective, and again, it's really very deeply tied into education, just coming back from an education conference, and the commissioner was speaking on there. And I think the opposite message, again, what I felt was that everybody is trying to row the boat in the same direction and ensure that, every student in Texas, and again, just because it was a Texas conference, but, every student in Texas has access to that rigorous education, that education that's going to prepare them for a life of choice and opportunity, whether that's going off to the military, whether that's going right into the workforce, whether that is going to further their education. But I think, we're continuing to shape and put emphasis on looking at markers that are most predictive of those things. Because at the end of the day, when students are leaving out of 12th grade, we want to make sure that all the education they got prior to is going to lead to success in any of those pathways. Because I think they're all really great, viable pathways and options. And you'll hear me talk about options all the time, because I think choice and options are very important, especially for students. You're leaving school. Not every student necessarily wants to go to college. Not every student wants to go to the military, the workforce, but they're all really great, viable options. And I think if students are well prepared and have that agency to pick the path that is aligned with their passions, but also affords them the opportunity to provide a living for themselves and their families, that's all we can ask for.
Yeah, and that they're prepared. The system has prepared them for whatever path is right for them, as opposed to it like trying to pigeonhole all students into one path. That's great to hear that you are picking up an alternative narrative that's much more, we're all pulling on the same side of the rope. That gives me hope. Talk to me about your work at IDEA before we switch to STEAM, because I'm presuming that that's the work that really got Brent's attention and maybe really helped you kind of solidify your thinking about what these values look like in practice. So tell me more about that.
Yeah. So I was super grateful and am to IDEA for investing in me. And that's really what they did. I was brought on. I had 2 years to work under exceptional principals, one down in McAllen, Texas, one over in San Antonio, Texas. And I'm such a big believer in that idea of a residency model. So I wasn't in informal classes. Instead, I had very concrete, specific training. But then I had a coach, a dedicated coach that I met with every week or two, that I had that mentor principle, that's really what they were, that was giving me coaching and feedback on a daily basis. And it wasn't this, big formal sit down, but it was inviting me into their thinking before they were making a significant decision, or then having me make that decision and giving me feedback about, hey, this was good, you need to adjust this for next time. And then I did get a next time to do it. And so when I eventually moved to Fort Worth to open IDEA Rise College Prep, there was not a day that went by that I wasn't leaning and thinking back to those conversations, those things that I picked up, because every day was encountering something different that I hadn't seen before. And so being able to draw on those past experiences to help make future choices or in the moment choices has been powerful. And I think that's been a theme in talking, with different coaches and folks, especially over this past 2 years. Hey, I'm not really sure about what's coming up, but from this past experience, I think I can do this. And they're like, you do know, you just need to, the context may be different, but draw on the experience that you have and let it guide you forward. Has been like a powerful reminder to hear that from others.
That's really wonderful that you had that residency experience. I feel like in education and for sure in nonprofit, a lot of times really wonderful teachers or really wonderful individual contributors get moved into leadership, but they're not given the support or the preparation or the ability to kind of like walk alongside someone who's done it for a minute. And that's massive that you had that opportunity.
Yeah, and I think it's so important at all levels, because there's a skilled component to education, but there's also just a decision-making component. I don't remember the exact stat, but teachers are making, probably tens of thousands of decisions every day. And so, to the outside eye, it looks very easy. When you see a good teacher, they make it look so easy. But for somebody new coming in, being able to have that experience, or if you're moving to an assistant principal, like you said, every level or role shift you have, just because you are great at one doesn't mean it's just an automatic flip. Like if you were an awesome teacher, it doesn't mean that just right away you can impart that to all these other teachers as you're coaching and training them. There's another skill set there. So I think having that residency, that opportunity to learn alongside somebody else, can really cut down on a lot of the missteps and the pitfalls, and ultimately, provide the best service for students.
So good. When I was reading about you, I read that your commitment is to a joyful culture of high expectations. And I absolutely loved those words. I bet they were very carefully, very thoughtfully chosen. I want to hear more about why that's true for you. And then I want to hear about how do you do that?
Yeah. So, and it's funny because a lot of the things that are student focused, that there's such a through line between the students and the staff, because I think it's true for both. And so to me, it's really important because oftentimes those things are juxtaposed as opposites, but in my eyes, they're two sides of the same coin. I've often, seen classrooms that seem energetic or joyful, but there's no learning happening. There's no expectations of students. And so that seems great for a little while. But then when you walk out at the end of the year and students haven't learned anything, that's not so joyful anymore. That's not, really in the best interest of students. And then I've seen the opposite as well, where you have these very high expectations of students and you're consistently pushing them, but there is no joy, there is no relationship there. And so it feels very empty and hollow, and very few students will continue along that path of somebody that's just continuing to push them, but not being able to have that celebration of their progress. I think about if there's a high bar, just keep telling people to jump at it, and you keep falling, like that's not a fun experience either. And I think that, leads to some detrimental outcomes. So for me, it's really that combination of both. Here's this high bar. I know you can do it. And we're going to celebrate the growth along the way, because almost always you need to have that growth before you get to that achievement or that bar there. So that's really the spirit of it, is making sure that we are pushing students to be their best. We're celebrating them along the way, encouraging them as well. And when they make mistakes, as we all do, making sure that we're addressing that mistake, and then we're back on the right track, because school is a place where mistakes are made and mistakes are learned from, and the stakes aren't nearly as high as, if you're in your job or something like that. So really wanting to be able to use it for that as well, that mistakes are okay. We need to learn from them. Making the same mistake over and over and over again is not. That's, then we're not learning. But really trying to de-risk that idea. Because I think that if you're afraid to make mistakes, then you're not going to learn and you're not going to grow.
Hi, I'm Katie Worden, producer of Oxygen for Educators. I want to spotlight our sponsor, TackieBox. TackieBox is an elementary school program that pairs innovative content with a tactile tool in daily practice to teach children to self-monitor their own words and actions and their responses to others. It's a proven tool that reduces behavior incidents by 66%. Through daily self-reflection, students build self-awareness, self-regulation, and meaningful connections. TackieBox is a light lift for teachers with a big impact on student well-being. Go to tackiebox.com to learn more and become a TackieBox district.
It makes me think of your earlier comment about the through line with the experience of the kids and the experience of the adults. How do you create that culture with your teams?
Yeah. So I think it's almost a similar approach, right? When I think about the teachers, the leaders, at the end of the day, our job is to be in service of students. And so that's something that I think we can be all very united around and consistently push towards, and holding that really high bar and consistently trying to strive towards that perfection that we'll never meet. And coaching folks and celebrating them along the way. So I think of the first year teacher, like the first year teacher is not going to be where the person that's been doing it for 7 years is, but they need to see where that bar is and get celebrated each time they're getting closer and closer to it. Because if I just say, oh, you're a first year teacher, you're not going to be that great. Let me lower the bar. Let me say this is fine. Then you're going to be okay with that. Mm-hmm. And you shouldn't be. We want to get you to be the best you can and support you along the way. Just like I think joy and high expectations go together, I think support and accountability go together. You're going to have a high support environment that's a high accountability environment because they go hand in hand.
Right. Certainly in cultures that are sticky for educators, where they want to stay, they go hand in hand. To your earlier point, if it's out of balance, it affects retention, recruitment, satisfaction, certainly the relationships with the kids. What have you changed your mind about? Like, what's something that you believe and know today that maybe you saw very differently earlier in your career?
Yeah. I think that probably would be the post-secondary pathways. I think especially thinking about the early 2000s, early 2010s, I think there was this push of college for all. And I say college or bust is the way I say it, because it's not college for all. College for all is fine. If everybody has that option, I think that's great. But I think it comes down to, as I said, that option. And so I interpreted it very much as college or bust. If you weren't going to college, then you weren't doing anything. And I think that was really damaging, especially when I look at, for example, you can go get your high school diploma, go do a certificate program, and go work and be a mechanic with American Airlines, and you can make more than a starting salary for a teacher. And so to make that individual that may be passionate about working with their hands, passionate about helping support just global travel, feel less than somebody else that went and got a 4-year degree is not okay. Mm-hmm. And so for me, really being about preparing students for whatever path, but empowering them to make that choice. As I said, if they are doing something that they're passionate about, they care about, and they're able to make that living for themselves and their families, that's the ideal thing. We're all different. Something that I want to do is going to be different than what somebody else wants to do. And that's okay.
And how significant to remove that layer of assumption that these paths are hierarchical instead of just different options. Like, if you remove that and you take away students trying to shove themselves into a path that might not be best for them or feel shame about whatever path they're attracted to, like that has major implications in terms of community well-being.
That's exactly right. And every time I think about, whether it's an electrician, a plumber, different things, like it's very, very expensive to have them come out and do some work. And there's, a huge shortage. And I think about the link between that college or bus time. How many people might have been an amazing plumber, electrician, carpenter, kind of you name it, but they were sort of discouraged from that. And then maybe they went and got a year or two of college degree, but then dropped out because it wasn't the right fit. Now they have that debt from that. Now they're kind of behind from going to a different pathway. And so when I see things like that, that's really heartbreaking to me, because I think, that always what if.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's a great example of something being heartbreaking that you're doing something about. So tell us about the STEAM plan.
Yeah. So I think after working for some large educational organizations over the years, I just started to think about a different vision for success. And on my side, it wasn't looking or measuring the number of students served, but really thinking about the absolute quality of the couple students that we are serving. And so instead of making an impact by, educating, tens of thousands of students, really focusing in on Fort Worth, which is an incredible city and a place that I feel so indebted to for all the support it's provided me, and being able to make sure, hey, every student that's walking out of our building has a great high school to go to that will take them that next step of the way, whether that's preparation for a college career, the military. And that, hopefully as students alongside that are seeing all the incredible options that are right here in Fort Worth, as they're going down those different paths, continuing to give back and support the city, which we all live. And I think over time, that can have an incredible impact positively on the city. And so it's just a different way of thinking about it. There's not one right or wrong, but, wanting to then chase that vision of success.
Mm. And will STEAM be a high school and it opens in 26, or it's a alongside program, or what is it?
Yeah. So we're a middle school. So we're going to open with sixth grade, and we'll grow to serve 6 through 8. And, everybody asks, well, why aren't you going 6 through 12? Why aren't you moving into high school? And I'm a big believer in going where the need is. And so there's a huge needed middle school. And I'm so passionate about that age group because I think it's the time that students are forming their opinions of themselves, of the world. And so the way I see it is building a foundation for the future. That's what we're doing at Fort Worth STEAM Academy. And then partnering with great high schools, because within Fort Worth, I think just of a handful, you've got I Am Terrell, that's STEM and visual performing arts. Incredible. They've got this huge black box theater. I've been there several times, and the work that kids are doing there is just absolutely incredible. You've got Cristo Rey that has a work study program where students starting in 9th grade are in the corporate world getting these different experiences. Then you have stuff like the dual credit schools, the partnership that Fort Worth ISD has with TCC. Students can walk out the door with an associate's degree. And then I think about Trimble Tech, like the range of CTE programs or career and technical education is incredible. They're doing work on cars better than where I take my car to the dealership, or they're going across the street and getting that exposure right in the hospital district. So I think of all of those things. We couldn't do any of them or match to the degree that is happening. And why would we? The goal is to be that great partner and ensure our students are well prepared for success, and share with families some of those options, many of which they may not know about. So that way, as they're going through that 3-year of middle school process, they're narrowing in on, hey, what's that 1 or 2 school that I would really like to go to for high school? And then how can we help ensure that we're guiding them there? Because families are busy, busy. And so just wanting to be that extra source of support, information, whatever we can do to ensure students have a great K-12 education. And it's not all with us. we're here making sure that we're taking care of that middle school. But then on that high school side, it's really about that partnership. And I think it just aligns with my belief about community.
And it's heartening because over the last couple decades, there's been a lot of emphasis on early childhood and elementary. There's been a lot of emphasis on the other end of the K through 12 spectrum, but middle school often gets underattended to and lost. And it's when developmentally kids are so vulnerable and also so open to be shaped toward a path. So it makes total sense. Very exciting. Okay, I am super curious about your well-being rituals, if you have any. Like, how do you stay in this sort of visionary, grounded, excited headspace?
Yeah. So I think a couple of things. It's been really exciting to be in that, just first starting off kind of that visioning space, now moving into taking that and operationalizing it, which is also really exciting to be able to take what is this, vision or mission statement or ideal or core value, and now how are we embedding that into the daily practices, the systems. And then the most exciting part for me is then that execution phase. And you always toggle for me between the execution and operation. It's like, oh, we need to go back and kind of tweak the system and then go out and execute on it. But that iterative process to me is so exciting because it just continues to get better and better over time as you're listening to feedback, you're looking at the data, and then just continuing to refine, knowing that you're never going to start with something 100% perfect, and it never translates 100% from paper into real life. And so to be okay with, we're 80% of the way, let's start, and now let's go back and keep refining till we get closer and closer to that 100%.
Yeah, like the juice for you is in the process. Like that's you're here for that. You're not trying to like spend all this energy toward an end then that's when you've arrived. Doing the work is the arriving for you, is what I'm hearing. Yes, no, you're spot on. I think because in reality, if I think about the end goal of next year, we'll have a sixth grader, and then it's going to be several more years, 3 years with us, 4 years in high school, and then to see kind of just the start of that future of choice and opportunity, that's 7 years. And I've been working, 3 years on this project before you open the door. So if I was waiting 10 years to get that, that benefit, that'd be really tough. So it's all about the small little milestone wins in the process. I think the process is such a joy, and sometimes day to day you may not see the impact as clearly, but through the course of the year over year, I think just seeing that impact grow is incredibly rewarding. Mm-hmm. What bums you out?
Yeah. I think what bums me out is when I look at the data for students, whether it's in the city, in the state, because I think so oftentimes it can get lost in the numbers, especially when it's not paired with those stories and those narratives. But it's really stark, even across the country. When we think about it, they had the last, I think it was the measures of progress that came out, and there was a decline in so many different categories. And to know the impact that has, right? That link again between education and involvement in the criminal justice system, or poverty and things like that. So knowing that already these, students in third grade or fourth grade, if there's not some significant intervention to change the path, that their future is not bright right now. That is really disheartening. I'm there, but I think that's, juxtaposed against the bright spots that we see, again, both locally, statewide, nationally. So having an opportunity to go to some really incredible schools over the past couple of years is, has the opposite effect. It's very encouraging, those bright spots. And my hope at the end of the day is that the more and more we learn about the bright spots, the more and more that rising tide can really raise all ships, and more students can be getting that quality education that is going to provide that bright future.
Mm-hmm. And I can picture that the way your mind takes in the data also bums you out, but also fuels your intensity around the work you're doing and the reasons that you want to get it going, make sure it's the highest quality possible, blows out the picture of what kids can, what path might serve what kid. And like, I could see where that fuels you as much as it breaks your heart.
Yes, I think you're spot on. Every time seeing those data points, to me, it fuels urgency. And it fuels the weight of the matter. And so just telling staff, the work that you're doing on a daily basis is truly a matter of life and death for students inside the building. And that's not hyperbole there. And so, there is, whether you look at the criminal justice system, whether you look at poverty, like all those things are tied really closely to quality of life, life expectancy, all of those things. And so it really does have that huge weight and impact. And I make sure that people feel that, right? And it's not to be a negative thing, but people need to understand that every day, every moment inside the classroom really counts. And so there's not just the day to kind of kick back because you got 100 and something more. No, every day and every moment counts. And I think continuing to put that out front for people is important, especially, there's always those times in the year where you're tired, or, it's stressful, or the holidays are coming, or whatever it is. And so I think just reminding people about what's at stake and also the positive impact they're having to keep folks going. I think that's one of the biggest things, is keeping motivation really high for everybody, and then celebrating and recognizing. I think those are some big things to keep that momentum going, because it's incremental in some ways, but if you're not consistently pushing along, you slip back.
And it just really recognizes the sacredness of the work. Because I know it can feel, like a grind sometimes for people. All jobs can, certainly educators, that their jobs are hard. But there's very few jobs where you can be like, the trajectory of the people in the room with you is shaped by what happened between y'all today. Like, that's just not true in every job. And it's true every day for educators. That's wild.
And it's really a privilege. I think that's the thing for educators to realize. Like, it's a privilege to be an educator and to serve students and families, and, like you said, help shape those futures.
When you were kind enough to agree to visit with us, was there anything you wanted to make sure we talked about?
No, I mean, I've really enjoyed the questions and the pieces that you've shared. I think whenever I have an opportunity to chat with folks, I like to let them guide it and see where the conversation goes. I think for me, being able to have great conversation and talk about these things is really energizing to me. And so I'm not coming on with, an agenda. I want to make sure we cover these things. No, I think just, it's a real privilege to be able to speak about education, the power it has, because to your point, sometimes teachers, educators, are looked down upon. And that to me is really not acceptable. And so any opportunity to be able to elevate the high quality work that is happening throughout is really important to me.
Perfect note to end on. Thank you so much. Genuinely, thank you for what you're doing and how you're innovating, and how many kids are going to have different futures because of your work and your vision and the work of your team. Like, that's really exciting.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate this opportunity to chat with you and have such a energizing and powerful conversation.
Talk to you soon. Bye. Welcome back, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you. Where should we start?
What would you like to start with? Was there something that grabbed your attention the most?
Yes. I think for me, his why is the most moving why because it's so personally aligned with my own why. That's really what got me to triple down on the work that I do was understanding the criminal justice system and wanting to proactively help kids not end up there because it's so much harder to get someone out once that X is on their back than to proactively do that work. And I think the fact that, his original plan was to become a public defender and then he found himself in education. I loved I wrote down a specific comment that he made when he was telling his story. I really was passionate about fairness and wanting to make sure that in a system where resources so often determine outcomes, that hopefully I could help it be just a little bit different than that. Oh. So yes, I just loved that. That was, we haven't gotten that why yet.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated it.
It is very resonant with you and your background, so that makes total sense. I hope all the educators that are listening really cue into the fact that he had that guide. He was looking for justice, equity, access, opportunity. And after scanning all the ways that he could impact that outcome, like what are the most powerful levers, he assessed that the most powerful lever for impacting those longer term things is education, which is just remarkable and should be hopefully metabolized by everyone in education, that the gravitas of their work.
And I think too, education and also that connection that comes through education. Like, again, focusing on that connection piece. I know I think I've talked about this on the podcast before, but we did a research study once where we had an inmate talk to other inmates inside of a maximum security prison and just, more water cooler conversation so that they would feel free to speak. And they talked about, like, when was that moment, if you look back on your childhood, where something changed for you. And so often it was a response from, stepping over a line, kicking over a trash can, or throwing something in a classroom. And that if connection was there in those moments, that completely changes the trajectory of that child's life. And most of the stories and anecdotes all traced back to elementary school. So yes, it is the most powerful lever.
I mean, I'm like, do we just stop now? Like, because really, in a way, almost everything we do is about that. And I think that's probably true for a lot of our listeners as well, that almost everything they do is grounded in that commitment to supporting these young souls into becoming who they're meant to be on the planet. And they've either they knew it from the jump, or they've figured out that in the absence of connection, it's really hard to do that. And when you do have connection, it turbocharges everything else you're trying to do, including teach math facts or whatever. I'm having like rapid fire images of our conversation with Tasha Nickelberry about Be the One, and our conversation with Rebecca Peterson about her commitment to relationship and education and connection, so that kids could open their minds to what she had to teach them with math. Yeah, it's interesting how it all layers.
It's interesting, and I also loved just the laser focus on middle school, which is different. That's not what most people talk about. And I made me think about when I was evaluating middle schools for my oldest child, and it felt so scary and like such a big decision. And I remember I called Dr. Sylvia Lopez, who was our first guest, and asked her for advice on that. And I remember she said to me, Chris, middle school is just hard for every child, anywhere, any way you look at it. And I think you made the comment, that's where students are forming the images of themselves. And so to have someone like Nicholas really laser focusing on that time period and then helping them pick their path. Like I loved that the success metric was not on number of students in the school. It's on, are we helping them find their path? Like that's powerful work.
Mm-hmm. And teasing apart the notion that college should be accessible to any kid who wants that versus college is the path for everyone, and any other path is a subpath or subpar path. I felt like he spoke to that so eloquently and compellingly.
He did. Yeah. I wrote that down. I love the thought about moving from college or bust to being better for community well-being and not letting anyone feel less than because of their job or their choice. It's such an antiquated idea, especially like I love the example I think he used, was an electrician or a plumber, I can't remember, but coming out and making $120,000 a year versus other options that you might get a college degree and a lot of debt, and but just the sense that that's better for community well-being. That was a really beautiful thought.
There was so much depth in his answers. He presented them so humbly, but there was just so much there, I felt.
Agreed.
How about his joyful culture of high expectations?
I labeled this little section of my notes soundbite session because he had so many good ones, and that was one of them. Who wouldn't want to be part of a joyful culture of high expectations?
Yeah.
And I loved his thought about that through line exists for both students and staff, and then thinking about mistakes. And he said he used the phrase de-risk the idea of a mistake. Like that was just grand to say it that way, and that mistakes should be celebrated as part of the process as long as you respond with change, was kind of what I added. As you know, it's kind of like I remember when one of my kids got in trouble and I just said, there's nothing you can do about what is done. We all make mistakes. It's what matters is what happens from this point on. That's the character defining part, how you respond to that mistake. And it just seems like that's the culture that is being built there for students and staff.
And he kind of went quickly through this part of that, but I feel like it bears like expanding a little when he talked about how often in support of earlier career folks, we lower the bar because they're not a 7-year, 14-year, 20-year person. But the way he said it was, you got to give them a visual of what the bar looks like, and you don't lower it, but you put their performance in context of where they are developmentally, and you celebrate every move they make toward mastery. So it's like, I'm not going to punish you for not being at mastery, but I'm not going to pretend mediocre is mastery. And it's so obvious the way he laid it out, but it's just not happening everywhere. So it's kind of visionary and brilliant, even though it seems like, yeah.
It's visionary and brilliant, and it applies to so many different areas, because I was really metabolizing it as a mom, and am I doing this for my kids? You do a good job of it, by the way. I always notice that, because you will always comment on different developmental stages, and I have, I want my kids to, hey, come on, be at my level here. I don't care that you're 15 and 18. So anyway, it was a really good reminder. It was a good reminder for me. But I will say, this was one of his, to me, sound bites. He said, "We strive toward perfection we will never meet." And that kind of made me sad because I want to meet that perfection. But I appreciated it. Like it's a nice way to think about it.
Yeah, but if you're striving for perfection that you'll never meet, you're going to hit 80, 90. If you're striving for 80, human nature, most of us are going to hit 70, 75. So it's like a marked difference if you're asking the team to strive for perfection, but you're holding that with realism, compassion. Like it's not punishing, it's aspirational. I used to tell our team all the time, like everything we talk about is aspirational, but if we don't have it up here, we won't get here. And for some of them, it was like, but we're not always this all the time, so we shouldn't say it. And I understood, like for them, that came from a place of integrity, but I agree with him. I felt like if we can paint the picture of where we're all trying to head, and that picture is like just marinated in high expectations and vision and a reality that we can co-create that is way beyond what any of us can even imagine or hope to achieve, then we get a lot closer to that than if we have like a mediocre vision that inspires no one. Want, want.
I think he brought out a little bit of sappy in you. This is really impressive.
Sappy. Oh, sappy. I'm sappy. Well, I did feel convicted by his like generosity of spirit. Because I was like, wait, you're a jaded wench, Michelle. That's what I thought. Sitting next to Nicholas, which ordinarily I wouldn't be considered jaded, but sitting next to Nicholas.
Or a wench.
Well, that, yeah. But like next to him, he had such an interesting combination of like sobriety, because it's not like he wasn't grounded in reality, but he just seemed to see the absolute best in people and systems, and which I would still argue with him about some of that regarding systems.
I'm glad you didn't.
There was no need to, because he's coming from that place and it serves him.
And he's doing something about it that's working. And he's
doing something about it that's working.
That's the great part.
And it stirs even in the most jaded among us, and I'll include myself in that in some ways, it stirs something for us too. So yeah, I was very inspired by what appeared to be his set point, which was very optimistic, very generous, very exacting, and also weirdly suffers no fools. Because those two things combined, you would think would clash, but in him they somehow didn't. Interesting.
I also loved his appreciation for powerful storytelling paired with data. He talked about that a lot. And I think some of the examples he used or I used, I'm not sure, but reading level to prison bed count and future incarceration, like that's the data, but it's the stories of knowing the people in the data and the people that love the people in the data. You have to have both, which is why I like to make magazines for a living. But I loved his appreciation for that. And when you asked him what bums him out, it was when it's just the data without the stories, because they have to go hand in hand to see the true picture of what's happening.
So cool. And I think it was in that same conversation that he so beautifully painted the life and death urgency around what educators do every day. Very,
the work they are doing, his specific quote that he gives his staff the message that the work they are doing is life or death. Every day and every moment counts. That's a good place to be.
A good place to be, and maybe a good place to wrap, unless you have something else.
Well, I would like to end with some of his comments, his final comments that I thought were so worth repeating.
Yeah.
It's a privilege to be an educator. And I concur that it's a privilege to speak about the power of education, which is why this podcast exists. And I would just say to Nicholas that we join you in the effort to elevate educators and the high quality work that they do.
Cheers to that.
Yeah.
All right. We will be back in 2026, and we hope everybody wraps the year in the way they hope and wish. And big thanks to you, Chris, and we'll see you on the flip side.
Thanks to you. Thanks to Nicholas, and thanks to Brent Beasley for sending Nicholas our way.
Indeed. See you soon.
Okay. Happy holidays.
Bye, you too.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Oxygen for Educators. Please like, share, and follow, and if inclined, leave us a 5-star review so that we can keep making content for you. Let us hear from you if you know someone we should interview or a topic we should cover.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guest and host and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any organization. The content is provided for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended as professional advice. Listeners are encouraged to use their own judgment and seek appropriate professional support when needed. Oxygen for Educators, its host, and production partners are not responsible for any actions taken based on the information shared in this podcast.